Okay, let's get started. Welcome back to the Hot Politics Lab meeting. And as you can see, we're back in our familiar room. So today we're a teaching activity. And our teacher today is Nathalie Giger from the University of Geneva. And she is currently, a visiting professor here at the University of Amsterdam, although visiting has mostly been staying at another home, a new home in the Netherlands, occasionally visiting the beach, and so I definitely hope to see more of you, Nathalie, here in the other semester that you're here. Let me briefly introduce Nathalie before we get started, because we go back. It's really nice to have you, Nathalie, because we go back a long time. And like me, you've started to work working on welfare state politics, transitioning to party politics, and now also transitioning towards trying to integrate more of a political psychology perspective. So it's really remarkable how we've had similar trajectories through the different political science niches. And so I'm really curious what you will present today, which has much more of a focus on inequality, which has also been a big theme of your work in the last few years. And without further ado, I want to give you the virtual space.
Thank you, Gijs, for this kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, only virtual, but we'll see. Hopefully, I'll be present and we can have a beer and discuss this research and other topics soon in person again. So this is, if you mention my roots in social policy, this is probably kind of this research project, part of a research project of mine looking at inequality, perceptions of inequality, and then how consequences of them. And this kind of tries to combine probably a bit, or goes back to my roots in social policy, but taking a different perspective on them. And I'm especially happy to present this work today because it takes a lot, it gets a lot inspired by political psychology work and tries to incorporate that in this perception, in this more political economy framework. I should also mention, especially to welcome Elisa Wolf, who's among the attendees, my co-author from the University of Geneva, currently, I guess, in Zurich. But that's in the nice thing about being virtual, know that people can join from different venues around the world. Okay, so what we're interested in here is looking at how people perceive inequality and if there is some distortion according to ideology. So why we're interested in perceptions of, or why we're interested in these topics. So there's increasing levels of economic inequality we have witnessed around the world, of course, especially in the US, but also in European countries. There's a famous quote of Barack Obama calling it the defining challenge of our times. But despite these rising levels, we actually haven't really seen much action against it. Or kind of against this phenomenon. There's some literature trying to explain that. Of course, the classical political economy work would kind of have this, or postulates this automatic process, no? To have once inequality is rising, people then increase the demand for redistribution and they vote for parties, and this kind of gets then balanced out. This is not really what we see. There's some structural barriers, probably, decline of social democratic parties and so on. But there's also a growing literature showing that probably people are not really good in this task of perceiving inequality. And of course, if we assume that people don't really get it right, don't get the state of reality, then this will also have consequences on their demand for this or on their redistribution preferences, but then also for the party they choose to vote for and so on. So the whole chain is spoken from their side, and this is actually really the focus we take here. So how distorted are these views, and can we is there maybe also a political aspect to this? So the idea that some people or some groups get the reality better than others. So just to start a quick comic to showcase this situation. So this is also, maybe I can say that already here, this is also to say that to get inequality right as a concept is not an easy task for citizens. It involves quite some cognitive. No, you have to get two sides right, not the rich and the poor, and you have to make a relation somehow. So that's not something easily observable, something that it's easy to see for people probably. Yeah, so the research questions we ask, is there an ideological bias? Does it translate? And I have something, because the original title had also something on elites. I would have something to say on elites, but let's see if we still have the time for that. Otherwise, I can also simply leave that out, the part. But it's part of the research project as well. Okay, so first, there's some evidence, probably not with the best measures ever. So I will come back to this point later on when I present our data. But there's some evidence that no matter how you ask questions about the degree of actual macroeconomic inequality, people don't really get it right. No, this is, as I said, probably not very surprising, because we know that it's so you have to get several concepts right and relate them to each other. The literature addressing why that is the case, or try to find solutions for this, is quite focused on an implicit assumption that this is basically simply a lack of information. Also, especially in econ perspective, if we just would inform these ignorant people, they would get it right, and then the whole chain would work again. So it's kind of a neutral, I call it a neutral lack of information as mechanism. And what they try to do then, what this literature shows, tries to do then, is then simply in a survey experimental fashion, give them some information. Oh, this is how the US performs in terms of inequality. This is where you stand, actually, not in the income distribution. So you're richer or you're poor, or the inequality is large or smaller than what you actually had in mind. There's a recent meta-analysis by a team at the OECD, and Manuel Chani and others, and they show that actually the information treatments show very limited effects on. So they raise what they do. They raise the concerns for inequality, but they have very little effect actually on redistribution preference. This, for me and to us, actually shows two things. So first, probably it's not the picture is more complex. No, simply information might have different effects. No, on kind of depending on the direction you get. No, that if you learn that you're poor, that has maybe a different effect than if you learn that actually you're richer than what you thought. And second, that probably the one aspect that's not addressed at all in this literature is the question why they then lack the information, or what doesn't motivate, or why they're not motivated to learn about this effect. And probably there's also a variation there, that some people are more likely to incorporate this new information into their thinking than others. So we in this work, we take a different perspective, and we say probably it's kind of in this situation of a difficult task to answer. People will probably just rely on heuristics when having to form perceptions of inequality, and probably kind of this is a fast, less cognitive involvement needed, and if you just rely on ideological beliefs, it's something also quite accessible probably in people's mind. There's this, so we say this probably it's not just a neutral lack of information. It's probably something with a bias, and especially the ideological distortion can have then also have a direction. No, it's not just neutral. So we argue that ideological beliefs is probably the one they rely on. There's some work showing that, for example, study by Sale, Boudou, and Mackenzie for Californian sample, they show that if you tell them if you give them partisan cues to start with, they heavily rely on them when answering questions about facts of inequality. So what we do then or what I try to do now is, so first giving you some reasons why it would make sense, or you expect that ideology plays into the answers to economic facts. And then a second step of the argument is then to say that could some ideological groups be less or be more or less distorted? No. So first, why should ideological beliefs or ideology as such be related as an easy heuristic? So we know from psychological work, but also from more political science work, that no inequality, or the acceptance and rejection of inequality, the desire for inequality, is essential to the concept of left-right ideology. You can argue that from the political psychology aspect, as Joost et al., or from a more classical theory aspect. And of course, the people are more likely to incorporate information that kind of fits this worldview. And probably a third reason could be that the ideological beliefs are quite accessible in all situations. So people can, or almost everybody can, position themselves on the left-right scale. Okay, then second step of the argument, which is a bit more complex, is then to say that could it be that certain groups are more wrong than the others? No, so the idea being that ideology doesn't not only conditions the link, or kind of conditions what you answer, but also the kind of the link between ideology and perceptions. And here again, some psychological literature telling us that no, there could be this psychological work saying that different cognitive styles could be a reason, that liberals or conservatives prefer more simple answers, so they would not engage more highly in this cognitive effort. There's the whole literature on system justification, which states that conservatism is associated with a more status quo rationalization. So this would probably tell us that conservatives are better in kind of getting the status quo or the current situation right. There's a recent study by Waldvogel et al. Showing that actually it could be the ideological beliefs in this case, egalitarian beliefs actually have an effect already more upstream, so that people don't even notice inequality in their environment, so that right-wing people, they don't even notice. So there could be a kind of attentional mechanism at play. So what this literature tells us, that there could be reasons to argue that there are distortions, but it's not really clear in which direction. No, it's not. So the system justification would say that right-wing people would be better in the task, while this upstream, while the kind of the Waldvogel upstream attentional mechanism would tell us that the left would be better in perceiving inequality correctly. So what we do, we simply go on the safe side and state competing hypotheses in both directions. So it could be that left-wing individuals see it as have more distortions, or it could be the other way around. So this is the hypothesis on the general picture of inequality, kind of the macroeconomic inequality. A second aspect in this redistribution puzzle is, of course, then the own position. You have to know the degree of macroeconomic inequality, but then you also have to know where you stand yourself. And this is the second. So we have information on this as well. And here we simply base ourselves on some literature on characteristics of left-wing people. They're more likely, or they have more stronger incentives probably to underestimate their own position, especially if they know from higher income brackets. Yeah, so this is third hypothesis. As I mentioned at the beginning, we then interested also in how this travels on, so kind of the consequences the biased perceptions have on support for distribution. And simply here to say that there's a literature out there suggesting that perceptions, and this is what we base ourselves on, it's all about how the subjective perceptions, how that these matter more than objective conditions to explain demand for distribution. Being the perceptions of inequality, macroeconomic inequality on the one hand, but also perceptions of the own position on the other. And this is then just a hypothesis on this on this traveling on downstream effects. Okay, so this what we have as data is a new data set that I collected together with Jonas Pontusson at the University of Geneva. So we merged two project resources. He had hired an ERC I have a Swiss National Science Foundation grant, and so we decided to survey 13 countries, or 14 actually, so the UK, the US as well, but this is missing here. So we have 2,000 respondents in these 14 countries, and we have a set of variables that pertain directly to these perceptions. Yeah, so on the one hand, we have a new, or we call it innovative, measure of inequality. I will tell you about this in a minute. And then we also have their own position. So these as I said, it's a difficult task to actually get people's perceptions of how they see inequality. The literature has struggled with that, with how to best measure that, and there has not, also ours is not probably not the final solution, but what has been done before is now to showcase kind of some graphical display of societies, and then just saying like which of the type do you think your country is most likely to be. There have been some work on shares, how much, what's the share of the total income that's owned by the rich or by the poor. But this was also not really what we thought what people would really actually do when asked about this. So what we decided to do is ask about money directly, about wages directly, and ask about these wages in a way that allows us also to combine it then to the actual degree of inequality. So what we try to get at, we ask citizens in the surveys, what's your guess, or the rich household, so the 90th percentile, or the median household, and what the poor household earns. You can do the task for the Dutch case if you want to. It's not an easy one, I agree, but this is what we asked them, and then they had to give the just the euros these people earn. And this is allowed us then to calculate the perceived ratio between the poor and the rich household. This is what we get. There's of course less, so the ratio is actually kind of at 1 or 0, at least it's truncated, because it can be the other way around. But we also see that there's a kind of a peak. People are kind of, or a larger of people are kind of sure what they, or kind of agree on how inequality looks like, but then there's a long tail of people just giving some very high estimates, especially for the rich. So the richest household would earn, I know, 1 million, but the 90th percentile household that doesn't earn 1 million, none of these countries. So this is, this is just overall perceptions across all countries. What we then, as a second, or what we're most interested in, is this distortion, so the under or overestimation. So we simply kind of confront these perceptions with the reality, with objective data on the average earnings of these households. And what you get then is a distortion. So here would be the kind of, this is the correct perception. Then we have people underestimating and people overestimating inequality. And same exercise we then do for this, where you would locate yourself. We simply ask how the percentage of households that are poor or richer than your own household. And again, we get a distribution that shows that people underestimate their position slightly, and also the mean is slightly to the right here. Okay, so this is just to give you an idea of kind of how these perceptions are measured. We then have of course, the most important independent variable is the left-right self-position, and then we have a bunch of controls. So this first result simply showing you that there is some link between ideological beliefs and how people perceive, or how they see these economic facts. So if you're more left-wing, your perceived inequality will be higher than you're more right-wing. Then if we go to the distortion, so the over or underestimation, also here we get into the whether left or right are actually better in getting it. And you clearly see the interpretation is here that the more downward you are on this graph, the better you're actually in guessing. inequality, because 0 or 1 would be the correct version. And you clearly see that the right-wing people are better in getting facts right. And that also holds true for their own position, because here, as I mentioned before, now the bias as such is negative, so people underestimate, but then the closer you come to 0, the better you get facts right. So again, showing you that right-wing people get inequality better. Okay. Quickly on a potential explanation, I have what could be a moderator here is the saliency of these concepts. There's no psychological literature suggesting that the more you're concerned, or the more you care about this thing, the more you're actually likely to distort. This is what we find in our data as well. Clearly, the more left-wing you are, the more you care about, the more you say that inequality is salient. It was taken from a whole battery of questions we ask about saliency, and this then also has an effect on your moderating this effect that I just showed you. So I wouldn't put too much emphasis on this black line, because there are really very few people that say that inequality is not important at all. What you clearly see, what we see then here is there's a certain variation according to saliency with a closer connection between the two concepts for the non-salient ones, but with a higher bias, especially that's visible here. So that the purple line, those that care the most about inequality, they are the most distorted ones. So actually what we see here is that the most people most likely to see facts not right, to distort facts, are the ones left individuals who care about inequality. Then briefly to the consequences. So perception. So here again, just the perceptions on retribution. So what I show you the literature, kind of just confirming early literature suggesting that perceptions matter to explain redistribution demand. But we also find some effects for the bias. So the more you bias, the more you kind of overestimate inequality, the more you're likely to demand redistribution. And the same holds true for the error in your own position. So the more you underestimate your own position, the more likely you are to demand redistribution. Also, kind of in the logic of the model, but still distortion present. Last, what we then tried to kind of get at now is how sizable are these consequences? Really, so if people would have kind of correct perceptions, would that actually matter? Would there be some different distribution for support of redistribution? It seems that it would not change so much. So this is simulations based on kind of showing you correct versus overestimation, and there's not much. So this is just the facts, and this is the error. There's some slight change, but it seems that the macro evaluation of inequality doesn't matter. So the distortion there do not matter too much to shift redistribution bond. Where we find more effects are for the own position. Where here, if people would get it right, there would be more, or they would not have this downward bias in their own positioning. This would increase demand for redistribution. Okay. To conclude, the distortion, this paper shows you hopefully that the distortions, there's some distortions in perceptions, and they actually have an ideological twist. So ideology matters, and we argue that it's this heuristics idea that people rely on heuristics to answer these fact-based questions, which would probably not be such a problem. It's not be a problem, but there's also some there's some distortion within that some groups distorted more. So the left, if you're a left individual, you're more likely to distort facts than if you're right. This has consequences for downstream attitudes such as redistribution, especially if your own position seems influential. So our results actually suggest that, showed you at the very beginning, that there was an experiment giving them partisan cues, and then they show that this is what they rely on. But even in the absence of any ideological or partisan cues, people still rely on ideological beliefs when answering these fact-based questions. I think I'll leave it at that, unless you want to hear something on the elite side, but we maybe also collect questions first. I don't know what you.
How long would the elite story? Oh wait.
Okay.
Yeah. If the elite story is like 5 to 10 minutes, maybe we can just do it all at once. Or
yeah. So this is very brief and based on various papers we have also on the topic. So I mean what's clear is that elites are actually an important actor in this whole redistribution game. If actors, if they don't redistribute according to what the public wants, if they do something different, then we also don't see redistribution as a result. What's surprising as during the start of this project, that there's actually quite little known about their ideas about inequality, or their evaluations and their justifications. Also, we don't really know much if they see inequality as a fair outcome, if they believe in trickle-down effects, and so on. So this is something we also look at in this larger project, and there's some other projects also looking at this now. Some expectations we have regarding this link. So first we would probably see that elites should have more structured and coherent belief systems. So this would say that this would suggest that ideological beliefs and attitudes towards inequality should be more tightly linked. There's some competing expectations on whether the distortion should be larger or smaller. No, there's some work suggesting that elites actually suffer much more from these psychological effects than others, than normal citizens. No, they fall also for these psychological effects and so on. On the other hand, we would expect that hopefully they have a bit better, they know more about political facts, and therefore maybe they know more about inequality. So I would say that the competing expectations, whether they're more or less distorted. What's clear that they should ideology should probably be more closely linked. Saliency should probably act as a moderator again, with the idea also that again that economic inequality is probably a more salient topic for left-wing politicians. What I show you is what I briefly show you is something on number 2, some on the second expectation, and something on the last expectation, namely that if higher saliency, it's probably also more harder to change than their attitudes. What we have here is that this is all data for the Swiss case at the moment. What I have here, maybe quickly show you so this is data from this REP project by 2 colleagues of mine in Geneva, where they surveyed national and regional MPs, actually quite many, and then they had a corresponding probability sample of Swiss citizens. So you can directly compare. So you have the same questions for elites and citizens. And what you see here, so what we try to do is here, the dependent variable is fairness of inequality. So the question whether you see inequality as a fair outcome or not. And what you see here is that the socioeconomic status plays a role, but then here the influence of the ideology is much larger for elites. This is also visible if you do this blind OAXA decomposition models, where they show that actually, so the connection between ideology and fairness here is larger for the citizens, for the elites than for the citizens. So they're more coherent in their belief structure. Probably that's what this picture shows you. Then a second, very brief slide or very brief insights on some experimental work we did with political elite in Switzerland again, so local politicians this time, where we try to influence their deservingness, or try to prime them on this deservingness of the poor. What's visible here is that there's some heterogeneous treatment effect by ideology, especially that the right wing, so that we see a larger effect for the right wing politicians, which probably makes sense now because it's, as I said, it's less salient for them. It's more like they're more likely to probably change as a result of an experimental intervention. So what we can say on the elites, yeah, so there's much stuff still to be done, and I'm actually trying to, well, I'm currently designing some more experimental experiments on this effect, so to get more closer to these effects for the elites. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Nathalie, for this exciting set of studies and results. For those of you who are listening online, who don't have the right to speak up, you can type your question in the Q&A box, and then I will read it out loud, and Nathalie, you can actually read along in the Q&A box. So while people might be thinking about their question, I have a question, Nathalie, about the implications that you draw here in relationship to the sort of partisan screen argument, right? That literature by Cheryl Boudreau and others that argues that people follow cues and express opinions in it to maybe avoid some sort of cognitive dissonance or something. And you say, well, here in the absence of cues, we also see the evidence of the partisan screen or the ideological cues. But my question is, how do we know this with the design of the study that you have, that this is evidence for a partisan? Because it seems that there could be a host of alternative explanations that could also explain why we see this effect in absence of cues.
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for letting me clarify. It's a very good question. It's not the direct evidence, obviously, it's simply kind of indirect. So this is as you all notice, now this is only observational work, so we can't really talk about causality. It's simply that we also wanted to have it on so the survey was intended to also cover a large variety of countries, and so it was not really feasible to do a lot of experiments. But this is to really get at the causal mechanism. Of course, we need experiments. I have some ideas on how to do them. For example, we could influence or treat the saliency of the topic. Actually, I think we have even some results from a different type of experiment which we could use for this to study this effect further. So yeah, changing saliency to see what effects it has on the link between the two. Yeah.
Excellent. Just a reminder, if you could type your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat or other places. People here in Amsterdam that want to ask a question, because I have Diamantis.
I have a very perhaps a silly question, but I wonder what was the reason why you focus on economic inequality and not in other forms of inequality, such as, for example, access to opportunity?
Mm-hmm. This is a good question. So we don't even focus on economic inequality only. So we have a lot of questions on inequalities and opportunities. We have a lot of questions on fairness that a PhD student of mine is currently writing his PhD thesis on. So the reason we focus on the economic inequality is simply because it has this kind of the direct link now to politics, or the whole original political economy literature focuses on this concept. But I agree, there's even literature showing that if you simply tell people if you simply ask people what they think, or kind of these cognitive interviews, if you tell them inequality, they not all of them at least think about economic inequalities, also things related to opportunities, related to gender, so that actually people probably have a more broader idea of what inequality means. This is why or one of the critiques I have on these graphical displays they have in the ISSP, because they don't really say something about whether this is now about economic inequality or about the society as a whole.
Excellent. Okay. Next question that was asked in the chat, which I take as an exception. The question is from Roderick. I'm working on the same question at the moment, and I have administered an item. Well, this is why it's more difficult. And I have administered an item on perceived income inequality in the Dutch parliamentary election study last year. I, however, asked. It's difficult. This one's. I, however, asked respondents directly to estimate the ratio between the lowest and the highest 10%. No way. I directly to estimate the ratio between the lowest and the highest 10%. The estimated, wait, sorry.
Inequality.
Yeah, but the estimated inequality was a lot lower than in your findings. So perhaps we can think some time about what might explain these differences.
I think the chair of the parliament would now ask, what is the question?
Yeah, I'm not Roderick, so.
Well, maybe Roderick can type his question in the Q&A box.
Yeah.
I mean, I have some ideas, but I could, if there's some literature showing that if you, this anchoring bias, if you ask them about ratios, they always kind of, it's lower than if you ask them separate questions. So this, there's a paper by Diana Mutz and Peterson showing that this, for example, is a big problem in the ISSP data that's often used to study questions of inequality. But maybe he has there's other ideas.
Excellent. The second question from Roderick, which is in the Q&A box. Thanks, Roderick, for that. My second question is, to what extent do you think belief certainty matters for the relevance of such perceptions? I personally think it might not matter so much, but others, like Flynn et al., think it does. Look, it's much easier in the Q&A box.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, belief certainty probably. Yeah, I mean, we find some effects on on education and so on, sophistication, that we have questions on that. We haven't really explored that yet, but I could imagine that people with that some of these covariates maybe play in there. Maybe it's not belief certainty, but the saliency certainly matters now, as I showed you a little bit, and this is something we want to explore also further. How if personal saliency matters, especially for the consequences, of these beliefs. Yeah.
Christian, that's a question.
Yeah, I would have a question, especially going back to the overall research puzzle that you stated in the beginning, where you linked it to a surprising low demand for this research distribution. I was wondering how that links to, for instance, this experience, and some studies have shown that people constantly overestimate the share of, let's say, refugees or Muslims in the neighborhood, which is a very high saliency issue that's constantly, or at least in the last couple of years before Corona. So how does saliency on the larger level, on the societal level, drive this misperception?
I guess what comes into play here is it's the type of question asked. I mean, what we find is also that they overestimate, on average, they overestimate inequality. But probably this also has to do with the fact that we asked about this 90th percentile, which probably some people at least take for the 99th percentile. There's a huge skewness at the end of the distribution. So the 90th parcel at the 90th and one at the 95th or 99th, this is way apart. And I could imagine that the overall overestimation has to do also might be also a result of the question asked, because other studies find that, at least some studies find that people underestimate, in the US especially, inequality. People are notoriously not very good in these factual questions, also about refugees or about other recently saw something on the kind of reasons to die. People also kind of are not really, we're not really good in these factual questions. Probably what matters here again is, so saliency is to me, so on the one hand, it's linked to this confirmation bias that probably you're kind of more likely to distort things that they fit into your worldview. On the other hand, there might also be a motivation to inform yourself more about these topics. No, so if you're interested in migration, you might also read more stuff about it and get more information. Of course, then it depends whether this information is balanced or not, or partisan to start with, which then again has some effect. But yeah, the saliency has this double effect. Probably that's my hunch at the moment. But I should do more. We have to do more research on this.
Christian, you have a follow-up question?
I just have a very small additional question, just out of pure curiosity. In your survey, in your data set, are right-wing people richer than left-wing people?
So what I can say, we have quotas, quite detailed quotas by income, which costs us a lot of money, because that's kind of what makes this survey different from a normal or from other online surveys that we saw that if we want to look in questions of economic inequality, we need really the rich and the poor. I think the rich are on average more right-wing, yes, but there is also so when we plot stuff by income groups, it's something for this fairness question. For example, we see that the richest decile, they completely off the rest. So they really the super rich or the rich are somehow they really have a different perceptions of the world than the rest of the population. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, we switch to the Q&A box again. There's first a question from Matthijs Roduin. Thank you, Nathalie. Very interesting study. I have a question about your dependent variable. We as social scientists can all understand what is asked here, I hope. But isn't this question rather complicated for many respondents? The question itself might be a little complicated, in particular for the lower educated citizens. Moreover, I could imagine that also many people who do understand the question itself have no idea about the distribution of household incomes, while at the same time being relatively knowledgeable with regard to the general and degree of income inequality in their country. Hence, could you tell us more about the validity of your dependent variable?
Yeah, I agree. It's not an easy task. We haven't done a lot of validation studies because there's not. I mean, what we can do is to relate it to these no sophistication questions and so on. Probably it will turn out that the higher sophisticated will have a better, clear idea. The motivation to ask in this way was that people probably have some, or if they compare themselves to others, it's in terms of kind of how much they earn or how much the others might not earn. It's not in terms of shares. No, what has been done a lot in the literature, and probably this has to do with the fact that there's also data on the shares. So here you would say that what's the share of the total income, which we don't really know what the total income is. What's the share of the earnings of the rich or the poor? And it's what this the reasoning in terms of share is probably not what people do. As I mentioned, it's not kind of it's not the best solution ever probably to ask this way. We did some pre-tests on this with different question formats. This turned out to be the one that took first the least time for them to answer and kind of showed the best scores in terms of validity. But yeah, it's not. If I could redo the survey, probably I would just give some estimates and then let them choose among a range of estimates, maybe something that they don't have to type, that they have any idea where to put themselves. But this is what we have at the moment.
You have a question.
Yeah,
I wanted to go back to the classic political economy models, Mune, Wallerstein, and Meltzer and Richard. I mean, what I don't think I ever really understood those papers, but I think their core argument has always been that it's really the median income or the median voter at the median income that matters, and your measurement is about the contrast between the 10 versus the 90%. And I wonder if that's the relevant contrast. I mean, if you take the analogy of the boat that you showed at the beginning of your presentation, it's the middle class that is screaming, right? So it's the middle position, the middleman, the middle woman that matters there. The lower class was already dead. And to build upon what Thijs's question, that's actually maybe that income is actually even harder to guess than the lowest income, because that, yeah, I mean, there's some sort of absolute lowest threshold of what you could make. So I wonder if you've looked at different operationalizations of this variable, and if this including this middle value matters or not.
Yeah, I mean, we have an estimate of the median income. So we not for this paper, but we did some quantum analysis also to kind of the low end inequality. That would be the difference between the poor and the median, or the top end inequality. So this certainly be something we could also do for this paper here. It's, yeah, people get the, yeah, I think that the one with the largest uncertainty is really the top income. But this is then also the one that's, so if you ask them, we also ask separately about the fairness of the top towards the top and towards the bottom, and you see clearly that the top income, that's where more people say that this is an unfair distribution of income. But that's a good point. We could do a robustness test and see if it kind of the same results hold if we take the median instead of the extreme ratios. Yeah.
Okay, Nathalie, there's a question from Luca Verstegen in the Q&A box. Thanks, Nathalie, for your talk. I'm wondering whether you can measure distortions in the sense of implicit misperceptions with explicit survey items. Don't you rather measure respondents' attitudes about inequality? For example, if I as a respondent want to fight inequality, I will tell researchers that I see inequality.
Yes, so this is, of course, we can't be, so we know that they often not perceiving inequality correctly, but this is something that we believe firmly in the sense of a misperception. It's not something we can directly measure with these surveys. I would argue it's probably a mixture of ignorance and and misperception, or open disagreement with what's out there. So if I as a respondent want to fight inequality, I will tell you, I see, we can actually test whether they want to take action. So we have a lot of items also, not only on redistribution but also on other attitudes. We could test that, but I would say it's a mixture of both. So, and we only experimental research, of course, can then disentangle whether it's a firmly held attitude or whether it's more just a matter of not knowing the answer and then relying on heuristics.
Mike has a question. She's here in the room in Amsterdam.
Yes, thanks, Nathalie. Really nice talk. I was wondering what you said something about in the beginning of your presentation. You said that if you give people information, like correct information about the distribution, that didn't really affect their perceptions. So I was wondering, do you think there would be a way to sort of correct these distorted perceptions? And could you explain a little bit more why giving information wouldn't work?
Personally, I don't think that that information will do the trick, because for me it's more motivational, or there's there's a motivational story also behind. So this is also what this literature shows, though, that if you give them information, it doesn't matter much. I don't know what you can still hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, then I'm just
Visually, you seem to be stuck in a thought, but
okay. Yeah, strange. Problem is if I switch my camera off, then sometimes there's problems to restart. Anyway, yeah. So, so for me, information will not. So providing more information will not do the trick, because it's also about the motivation for individuals to get informed about it. And then it's a very artificial setting. No, if you just tell them, look, inequality is this and this in your country, it's not, yeah, that how much effect then this has on the long term also, and on how much these people then incorporate this information is, yeah, not very clear. And this is what the Charney et al. Study shows. It doesn't have overall, there's no consistent effect on support for resolution.
Nathalie, I have a question, and it relates a little bit to goes back to the perceptual screen idea, because how I read some of the work that came out on this sort of perceptual screen and factual misperception was that the original idea is it's partly expressive responding. So Bullock and Pryor in studies showed that if you offer people incentives, then actually the misperceptions went down, which was then sort of seen as evidence. Well, look, it's actually, people actually don't have a distorted view. It's actually they're just expressing their partial loyalties. More recently, Martin Wiesgaard from Aarhus said, well, wait a second, yeah, that might be true, but then it still matters because it matters how people attribute the blame in the misperceptions. Mm-hmm. So my question is this: if we think about the misperceptions here, or the perceptions and its consequences, are we then partly mixing expressive responding with the blame that is being attributed? And if that is true, what would be the way to disentangle these two possible explanations that could be in this misperception effect?
Yeah, very good question. So I don't think we can. So from the question that we analyze right now, we can't do that. But I fully agree that the attribution of the blame is an important step, and this is something we actually have detailed questions about in the survey. So the one idea I had, and I have not really written on yet, is that exactly this attribution phase might also be where things go wrong. No, if citizens think that inequality is something that kind of an outcome of market forces, and there's anyway nothing you can do about it, why should then they kind of react to growing inequality with a vote for more redistribution? And there we have items on. And it would be interesting to see how these misperceptions then link also to this to the attribution. If for some, so we asked about the attribution to the government and to big companies separately, so we could disentangle that a bit. But yeah.
Yes, and just very briefly follow up before I hand over the floor to Gijs. I think there also the left-right differences should show up, right? The people on the left should have very different ideas of who is responsible for creating this inequality compared to the people on the right. So rather than regressing the one sort of outcome variable on the other, I guess that the left-right and this attribution of responsibility gives you a lot more traction in where do these ideological differences then come from? Is it's corporations or people's own lack of effort in being successful or something like that? So yeah, I think that's great that you've asked these questions. Gijs, I hand over the floor to you. I believe you still had a question.
Very briefly. You've clustered, or you pulled all the countries together. Can you say something about between country differences?
Yes, we have a slide. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so but we for this paper we simply explore the kind of cross-country differences as a robustness test, and it shows that it's actually it's kind of a more or less universal pattern what that we see. Of course, with slight variation. It's of course nice that we have this 14 country, but then it's also a bit it's a bit a difficult number, no? So you can't do much in terms of statistical analysis with this 14, but still there's a lot of different contexts to cover. But yeah.
As a very general point, I think, I mean, I don't know how far you are with writing this paper, but on average, I think the evidence for your paper for your argument looks a lot stronger if you present them as separate analysis. I mean, if you replicate the same effect in 6 or 7 different countries, I think there's a lot stronger evidence for your claim than that you find an effect in one country, which is very strong, and then not in all of the other 6, but the whole pooled thing is statistically significant. And you never notice from a multi-level or cross-sectional time series model. And we are so accustomed to pooling everything together. But yeah, I think it actually hides the strength of your argument, particularly when you say that you replicate it or you find the same effect in each of these countries. So. Okay. That's also the end of today because it's 4 o'clock, and I want to thank you, Nathalie, for this really interesting presentation, and I'm looking forward to talking more about this in the next few months here in Amsterdam. And you already have our coffee mug, so. We'll fill it with beer the next time. Yes, yeah. Okay, great. Let me just take 1 minute to announce the schedule for the next few weeks. So next week we have Israel Weismel Manor, and we'll probably learn the correct pronunciation next week. He's from the University of Haifa and will give a talk titled "From Corruption to Cyberspace." Same place, same time. The week after, February 4, Christel van Eck from the corporate communication group here in Amsterdam will talk about conceptualizing online climate change polarization, which is a talk about her recently defended PhD dissertation. And then 11 February, we have Amelie Godefroot, who's currently at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. We'll talk about the topic how terrorism is changing us. And the last talk in February will be February 18, Graduate Friday with Maaike Homan and Chiara Fialli. And Maaike will talk about the consequences of emotional politicians, a conjoined experiment. And I can tell you we've already analyzed the data this week, and it looks really exciting.
Lots of stars.
Lots of stars. All in the wrong direction. Chiara, who's from the University of Bern, will give a talk titled Personality in Political Information Consumption, the Mediating Role of News Use Motives. Okay, I'm really looking forward to these meetings, and I hope you do too, and I hope to see you there. And for now, I wish you a great weekend.
Thanks so much for having me, and see you around soon.
Yeah, hope so.